Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's begin today's session of comprehensive news analysis with the first article from the Hindu newspaper titled Reflections on Flying Blind into the Storm. It is written by a couple of well renowned authors, Gagandeep Kang and Gautam Menon. The theme of the article is that the government must be quick about taking decision about the booster dose for the COVID vaccine in view of the rising number of cases of Omicron. Also, the authors point out that the government has not been very forthcoming with sharing data about the pandemic. If the government wants the scientists to predict the severity of the next wave and the severity of the Omicron infection, the government must be open to sharing official data with the scientific world, and only then there could be robust scientific models developed over time. One of the reasons why the government has not been quick on taking decisions about the booster dose is because the number of infections of Omicron in India are still pretty low and are under 100. But it is just a matter of time before this number of 100 converts into thousands and lakhs, as we have seen in the Western countries. The authors here say that right now, Omicron cases in the United Kingdom in the coming 2 to 4 weeks will be about half of the total COVID cases. The WHO also put out a statement recently saying that the Omicron variant of the coronavirus is spreading at a pace faster than any other variant that they have seen till now. Although the severity of the Omicron cases appear to be lesser than the Delta wave, but we cannot take any chance by delaying our response against this new variant of the coronavirus. Now, the authors say that the current situation of India has certain positives and certain negatives. First, let's talk about the positives. As compared to the second wave, we are much better prepared with the stock of medical oxygen, and over half of our adult population is completely vaccinated with both doses of vaccine. Also, about 85% population of India has taken at least one dose of vaccine. Not just this, we are also in advanced stage talks of discussing vaccines for people from the age of 12 to 18 years as well as the booster shots. But the authors here give a warning that this discussion stage should not go on for a long time and the government must take the final call as soon as possible. The biggest negative, as I said earlier, is that the government is not being transparent about sharing data about the pandemic. The only data that is openly available right now is the vaccine data. How many people have taken the doses and how many stocks does the government have? But apart from that, data about people getting reinfected, about contact tracing of people who are being detected with Omicron, this sort of data is still not being shared with the scientific community, which is a matter of concern. The authors say that in April 2021, 900 scientists, including these authors, had written a letter to the Prime Minister saying that while the new pandemics can be unpredictable features, our inability to adequately manage the spread of infections has resulted from epidemiological data not being systematically collected. After this letter went public, the principal scientific advisor did promise that action will be taken and there will be sharing of data at a much better level. However, over 6 months have passed and this has not happened till now. The authors say that the data from ICMR is still not accessible to the scientific community, and the CoWIN app, as I said earlier, only talks about the vaccine related data and not data related to the patients. The respective state governments have been asked to maintain data on hospitalization, etc., but that also is not available to the general public. What is surprising is that the most trustworthy source of data right now is not any government data. It is in fact a volunteer run organization running by the name of COVID-19india.org, where thousands of people have contributed, including scientists, volunteers from the health field, etc., who have compiled as much data as possible. This is very unusual because no individual or authority can claim to have more data than the government. It was expected that the government will play this role, but it is a volunteer organization that has become the primary source of data for the scientific community right now. If the government wants to be better prepared for the next upcoming wave, the only solution is to share all that data with the scientific community and help them with all the resources that they require to predict when and how would the next wave hit us. We can also learn from the example of South Africa, where the scientists were extremely prompt in finding out the Omicron variant and sharing this information from the entire world. The reason why South African health authorities were able to detect a new variant was because their data sharing provisions. Thus, if there is anything that we can learn from South Africa, that is the importance of sharing data. Multiple cabinet meetings have been held in the past couple of months where the government had to decide on a booster dose, but no such decision has been taken. The authors here say that we should learn from the experience of other nations because even if right now the number of Omicron cases in India might not be very high, but we have to be prepared for that because sooner or later the number of Omicron infections will increase in India as they are doing around the world. Now, an interesting point here is if the Omicron infections are increasing throughout the world, what is it that the other countries are doing to fight against it? The one piece of big positive news has come from Pfizer, the company which was one of the first to develop the COVID 19 vaccine. Pfizer has been working on a COVID pill called Paxlovid. And the good part is that after their clinical trials, they have claimed that their pill has been able to fight off the Omicron variant and has been able to reduce the risk of hospitalization and death by 88% if the course of the pill starts within 5 days of the symptoms. This is a 30-day course with one tablet to be given every single day. This is important because a Pfizer vaccine, as per the trials, has given much lesser protection against Omicron as compared to the other variants. This pill, however, is bringing positive news throughout the world. A few weeks back, the Pfizer CEO had made a statement in support of the booster dose and was heavily criticized by the people throughout the world, saying that he just wants to sell more medicine to the entire world. But now that Omicron has become a reality, we are realizing the need of this new medicine. It is estimated that this new medicine would bring in a revenue of $24 billion to Pfizer in the year 2022 and $33 billion in 2023. This will be the highest single year sale of any medical product in the entire world in the history. Pfizer has also said that we will allow generic manufacturers in 95 low and middle income nations to produce their vaccine and sell it at a lower cost, which is a relief for many developing nations, including India. This medicine may be available as soon as the end of this year in the US and other European countries. In fact, many governments have already placed order with Pfizer for the Paxlovid pill. These include the US, which has placed an order of 1 crore courses. 1 crore courses means 1 crore into 30 because 30 pills is one single course. The UK, South Korea, Italy, Canada, and Australia have also placed an order with the Pfizer already for this particular medicine. Thus, since the Western countries are taking effective steps to prevent their population against Omicron, it is time that the Indian government also thinks on similar lines. The next article that we have talks about the WTO's challenge to India's MSP program. The author here says that while the farmers are demanding a legal backing for the MSP and everyone in India is debating whether or not this is a good idea, we are ignoring a very important point. That is, if India does provide a legal guarantee for the MSP for all the 23 crops, it would most probably push India above the subsidy limit provided by the WTO, and it will create multiple problems for India in the WTO with our subsidy program being challenged by other nations. The article here talks about the AOA, that is the Agreement on Agriculture of the WTO, which says that trade distorting subsidies given by governments in their country should be limited. As per the AOA, there are three types of agricultural subsidies, that is, green box subsidies, the blue box subsidies, and the amber box subsidies. The green box subsidies are in the form of income support given to the farmers. The blue box subsidies are direct payments under production limit given to the farmers, and these are regarded as non-trade distorting. Means these two types of subsidies can be given by the government to their farmers without any limitations, and the WTO will not say anything against it because it does not distort international trade. However, the Amber Box subsidy, which is kind of a direct benefit transferred to the farmer, are considered as trade distorting. Let me give you a very simple example. Let's assume that a farmer is spending rupees 30 per kg to produce rice, and this rice is being bought by the government at rupees 45 per kg. Now, under the public distribution system, the government has to distribute rice at a much lower cost. So, government will sell this rice at rupees 3 per kg. Means there is a subsidy of rupees 42 per kg that the government is enduring because the government bought the rice at 45 and the government is selling it at only rupees 3 per kg. So, the government subsidy bill will be extremely high. Apart from this, when the government offers subsidized fertilizers to the farmers, when the government offers free electricity or free water to the farmers, that also adds to the government subsidy bill overall. The problem here is that if someone from outside India, let's say from Bangladesh or from Sri Lanka, if companies try to sell their rice into India, Indians will not buy that rice. Why? Because Indians will say, we are getting rice at rupees 3 per kg. Why will we buy your rice, which will be much costlier? Thus, it would create an environment which would be disadvantageous for people importing rice into India. So, that is a trade distorting subsidy. Because, as per the WTO, products coming from foreign countries should also be given national treatment, which is not happening in this case. So, the WTO says that India should not sell rice at such a cheap price. But India says that we have a lot of poor people in our country and they can't afford rice at market price, so we have to sell it at this cost. This is the entire debate. So, how much can India's subsidy bill be in total? There is a limit on that put by the WTO, which comes under the Amber Box subsidy. The author here says that if India starts to procure all 23 crops at the MSP, then our bill of subsidy will be much higher than the WTO given limit. Because right now, government mostly only procures wheat and rice and not the other products. As per the AOA, for the developing countries such as India, the limit of their subsidy bill is 10% of the total value of production of that product. So, for example, if India has produced 1000 kg of rice, whatever is the value of this 1000 kg rice, of that value, 10% can be India's subsidy bill. Now, how is the value calculated? That is to be calculated keeping in mind what was the price of rice in 1986 to 88, because that is the base year. For India, the price of rice at that point of time was about $262 per ton. For example, let's assume that at that time the price of rice was rupees 5 per kg. So the total production value of rice this year is 5,000 rupees because we have produced 1000 kg of rice. Now the maximum subsidy bill for the government of India can be only 10% of this value. Now the problem is with inflation, MSP is increasing. So there is a lot of difference between the MSP at which the government will buy this product and the value of the product in 1986. Thus, the government has to give a lot more subsidy. Many developing countries have been arguing in the WTO that this base year is very, very old and it should change because at that time the prices of rice were very low. Because the prices were low, the total product value of today calculated will also be very low. So our limit of giving subsidy will also be low. So the solution here has to be that we should change the base year. But the developed countries are not ready for it. For the developed countries, their rule is that their total subsidy bill can be 5% of this value. But for developed countries, it is not much of a problem. Since the developing countries have been arguing that the base year should change, the developed countries have been against it. There is no solution to this problem in the WTO. Thus, the WTO in 2013 came up with a peace clause. Peace clause means unless we find a solution to this problem of base year, no country will challenge other countries subsidy program in the WTO. In other words, until we find a solution to this base year problem, India can give as much subsidy as they want. They can even go beyond 10% and no one will raise an objection in the WTO. That is why the only thing that is mandatory is that if India does go over 10%, they will have to inform the WTO about it. So earlier this year, India's subsidy bill was 13.6% of the total value of production, means over 10%. So we just informed the WTO, although no action was taken. But now the problem is that if India starts to procure other things apart from rice and wheat, like cotton, groundnut, etc., we would go beyond this limit. The other problem is that this peace clause was signed when the developing countries argued that we have to give subsidy to our poor people, otherwise, they will die of hunger. So, this peace clause is only and only applicable to those crops which are a part of food security program, means those crops without which people will not be able to survive. But MSP program of India includes things such as cotton, groundnut, etc., which are not a part of food security program. So the government can't convince the world that we have to give subsidy on cotton also, otherwise the people will die. Thus, the author here argues that if our MSP program becomes legal and we start procuring all the crops at the MSP, it would raise our subsidy bill much, much higher than the 10% limit. In the end, the author also gives a suggestion, that is, that India can move away from price based support to the farmers and rather just give income based support to the farmers. That is, depending upon how much income that a farmer has, let's say the government thinks that every farmer must earn 25,000 rupees per head. But if the farmer is not being able to earn 25,000, he is only able to earn, let's say, 15,000, the government just transfers 10,000 rupees irrespective of whatever their production is. That will not be challenged in the WTO. But the problem is that the farmers and government do not have a lot of trust between them due to the farm bill issue. And now, if the government tells a farmer that we are introducing a new system taking back the MSP, then most probably the farmers will not trust the government. So that is a problem that we need to solve. Although there is a peace clause that exists in the WTO right now, but sooner or later it will go away and we have to find a permanent solution and the government must work on that. Now, let's take a deeper look into what exactly is the Agreement on Agriculture. As I said, the AOA or Agreement of Agriculture came into force in 1995, and the idea was that there should be a fair trading system and farmers should get access to other markets also on an equal basis. Remember, it only applies to agricultural products and covers not just the basic products such as wheat, milk, etc., but also products that are derived from that, such as bread, butter, oil, processed products like chocolates, wines, etc., are also covered under this particular agreement. This agreement mainly focuses on three pillars: market access, that is, increased market access should be given. The countries should not impose import taxes. Domestic subsidy should be under control, as we just discussed, and export subsidies should also be under control. The peace clause was a compromise formula between the developed and the developing countries signed in 2013, under which, unless we find a solution to the base year problem, no country's food security program will be challenged in the WTO. There is no permanent solution found beyond the peace clause till now. It is important for you to understand the three types of subsidies. As we discussed, first is the green box subsidy. These are government funded and do not involve any price support. They also include environmental protection, regional programs, etc. Let me give you an example. Let's assume there's a cattle disease spreading throughout the country, and the government decides to give free medicines to all the farmers who have their cattle. Now, this can be called a subsidy, but that is not a trade distorting subsidy. So that will be allowed. Any help that the government is giving to the farmers as a form of disaster relief, farmer training, pest and disease control programs, etc., don't have any limit. They are allowed by the WTO as much as the government wants. Second are Amber box subsidies that create most of the problem. They distort production and trade, and thus they are limited by the WTO. For example, the subsidies that the government gives in the form of fertilizers, seeds, free electricity, etc., all of that artificially reduce the price of the production for the farmers, and that is why there has to be a limit on that. Blue box subsidies are used by only a few nations such as Norway, Iceland, Slovenia, etc. They also don't increase production. They are usually linked with the number of animals. So, the more animals that you have, the more support you will be given by the government. It also does not have any link on the trade distortion, and that is why they are also allowed by the WTO without any limit. The next article that we have is an interview focusing on UPSPA and whether or not it is time to now repeal it completely from the northeast part of the country. The experts here are discussing the problem of UPSPA with reference to what happened in Nagaland recently. As per the article, the Supreme Court appointed committee headed by Santosh Hegde recently said that the continuous use of UPSPA for many decades in Manipur has not had any impact on improving the situation, and thus UPSPA does not seem to be as effective as people assume. There are still about 32 active militant organizations that are working in the state of Manipur. In Nagaland also, many people say that UPSPA has been able to control violent activities and has brought peace in the state. But the authors here argue that the peace in the state has not been brought by UPSPA, but rather it is because of the ongoing peace process, because of which most of the outfits have come under one single umbrella and have resorted to other activities such as extorting money from the people rather than using any violence force. The Supreme Court also in multiple judgments have realized that UPSPA at many instances has gone out of hand. The Supreme Court has said that the Section 3 of UPSPA cannot be interpreted as giving unlimited powers. It does have time limits. The court has said that the Disturbed Areas Act, under which UPSPA is used, has to be renewed after every 6 months and cannot go on uninterrupted. The authors here mention the example of Tripura in 2015, where the chief minister said that the militancy levels in the state have dropped significantly and thus it is time for the UPSPA to go away. Following which, UPSPA was repealed completely from the state. The article also takes the side of the people working in the armed forces. There is no other country where the army plays such an active role internally within the country. Army is mainly an organization that is utilized to fight against the enemies on the border. And thus, when you use army against your own people, it is an abuse of the army power also because they are trained to fight against the enemy and not against their own people. The solution to the insurgency problem is not military in nature, but it has to be political and economical. That is, the economy of these states has to be revived, and the political class at the center government and at the state governments have to come together to find the appropriate solutions. And because the governments have not been able to take a stand on whether or not UPSPA should be repealed, the authors here say that maybe the best way forward is to have a referendum on UPSPA and ask the people about their own views. While most state governments in the northeast part of the country say that it is not in their hands to repeal UPSPA, but the example of Tripura could be followed by other states which has not been done. The fact is that the responsibility of maintaining internal law and order is with the police of the particular region. And the police in this region must be trained to handle such situations, and the army should be let free from these areas. This has also been recommended by multiple committees, including the Jeevan Reddy Committee, J.S. Verma Committee, and the second ARC. It is no secret that the UPSPA gives a lot of immunity to the armed forces. The government of India has even denied permission to prosecute any armed forces personnel, even in the case of alleged fake encounters. The other question is whether UPSPA has played a role in derailing the ongoing peace process. The Nagaland peace process has been going on for over 2 decades now. The talks first started in 1997, and till now it has not reached its conclusion. The authors here say that it is the local people of Nagaland which are suffering the most since they are caught between the state and the non-state actors. That is, groups such as NSCN, despite being a part of the peace talk regime, have been extorting money from the businessmen, entrepreneurs, and exerting their influence over the local people. The government, on the other hand, has not been able to take a lot of action against them because they don't want to derail the ongoing peace process. The unique thing about Nagaland is there is almost no opposition. All the 60 MLAs have joined the government saying that they want to support the ongoing peace process, but almost 25 years after it has started, it has still not reached its conclusion. The authors say that maybe the NSCN does not want to conclude the peace talks, they just want to use it as an umbrella under which they are still thriving. Authors also point out that one of the reasons why army has to be involved in these areas is because of the 16-kilometer free movement zone that we have with Myanmar. As we discussed, a lot of Naga tribes also live in Myanmar. A lot of Nagas who live in India have their relatives in Myanmar. So the two countries, that is India and Myanmar, have made a pact under which 16-kilometer zone from either side of their border is a free movement zone for the Naga tribes. That is, Indian Naga tribes can go up to 16 kilometer in Myanmar, and the same is with the Naga tribes living in Myanmar. Because an international border gets involved here, that is why the army has to play an important role. This free movement zone at the border has also led to problems of smuggling of arms, drugs, etc. And that is why just removing AFSPA will not be the solution. The government of India also has to come up with a concrete solution to this free movement border problem. Ever since the unfortunate Nagaland incident has happened, there have been a lot of news articles about AFSPA. We have also discussed AFSPA many times in the CNA and in the daily quiz. So, what I wanted to do here today was to discuss some of the recommendations given by various committees and the Supreme Court in the past about AFSPA, which can come in handy for you in your examinations. In 1998, the Supreme Court gave certain guidelines for the use of AFSPA under the Naga People's Movement of Human Rights versus the Union of India case. The Supreme Court said that a person taken under custody should be handed over to the nearest police station within 24 hours of the arrest, and the act should be reviewed every 6 months by the state. The BP Jeevan Reddy Committee, formed in 2005 after the unfortunate killing of a woman in Manipur at the hands of the Assam Rifles, also said that it is time for AFSPA to be repealed completely from the northeast part of the country. The Santosh Hedge Committee, which was mentioned in this article, also was constituted by the Supreme Court to review the encounter killings of 1528 people in Manipur since 1979. The committee randomly chose 6 encounter cases and said that out of these 6 encounters, 5 of them were not genuine and disproportionate force was used because AFSPA is giving sweeping power to men in uniform and it is being misused against the citizens. The Supreme Court also in 2016 and 17 talked about AFSPA. In 2016, the court said that every death in the disturbed area, be it of a common man or an insurgent, has to be investigated by the CID. Also, not every person who is violating a prohibitory order in these areas can be termed as an enemy. People still have fundamental right of Article 21 under the Constitution, even if they are living in disturbed areas. In 2017, the court said that the CBI should set up a special investigating team to probe the encounter deaths that happened under the AFSPA. However, hardly any of these guidelines have been utilized on the ground in these areas. The next article is about the US government deciding to impose sanctions against China over abuse of the Uyghurs Muslims in the state. Remember, this is not the first time that the US has imposed sanctions on China and Chinese companies on this matter. The US government has imposed sanctions this time on several Chinese biotech and surveillance companies for Chinese government's actions in the Xinjiang province against the Uyghur Muslims for violating their human rights. This decision will now prevent the American companies from selling their components to the Chinese biotech companies without special license. The reason why it has been done is that the US government is saying that China has set up a lot of surveillance systems across the Xinjiang province where most of the Uyghur Muslim population lives, and almost all of them have been facially recognized by the Chinese government, and the government has collected DNA samples of all the residents, which constitutes the crime of racial cleansing on part of the Chinese government. Now, Uyghurs Muslims are a group that have been in the news for a long time now. They are predominantly Muslim minority Turkish ethnic group that lives in the Xinjiang province of China. They speak their own language, which is very different from Mandarin or Cantonese spoken in China. Many of the Uyghur Muslims also live in Central Asian nations, such as Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan. Now, Xinjiang province, which has most of the population of Uyghur Muslims, is an autonomous region within China and is extremely rich in minerals. It borders 8 nations, including India, Pakistan, Russia, and Afghanistan. The persecution of Uyghurs by the Chinese government is not a new thing, unfortunately. It has been happening over the past few decades, and the world has kept its eyes closed, unfortunately. Ever since the government has found out about the mineral resources in the Xinjiang region, a lot of Han Chinese have shifted to this region. They have taken up better jobs and have sidelined the local Uyghur population. This led to a lot of violent clashes between the two sides, and in 2009 it led to killing of 200 people, mostly the Han Chinese that came in from outside. Since then, the government of China has been extremely violent against the Uyghur Muslims. They have been falsely accused by the Chinese government of terrorism and separatism, and have been forcefully detained by the Chinese government. Many of them have even been forced into slavery in the name of training. China claims that they have set up educational centers where they are teaching new skills to these people. However, multiple human rights organizations have pointed out that these are slavery and detention camps where no one can leave, and all of them are under surveillance 24/7 by the Chinese government. India, unfortunately, has remained silent on this issue, just like most other countries across the world. Recently, 43 nations, including the US, signed a declaration calling on China to give full respect to the rule of law and to the Muslim Uyghur Committee in Xinjiang. Since these are of Turkish origin, a lot of protests have also happened in Turkey, where local people are urging their government to take up this matter with China. However, Turkey has its own compulsions. Turkey is undergoing its own economic crisis and is dependent on the Chinese aid for a lot of things. China, in fact, has been the largest supplier of COVID-19 vaccines to Turkey. And that is why the Turkish government also does not raise this issue with the Chinese government. But that has not stopped the local Turkish population from talking about it. In March 2021, hundreds of Uyghur Muslim women in Turkey staged an International Women's Day march against the extradition agreement that China has signed with Turkey, and have demanded the Turkish government to take up the matter with China. This is the Xinjiang region of China where most of the Uyghur Muslim population resides. The next article is about a report published by an international organization called Reporters Without Borders, in which they have said that a record number of journalists have been jailed by governments across the world. As per the report, about 488 media professionals have been imprisoned around the world, which is the highest number in the past 25 years. Not just this, 46 journalists were also killed last year, including 7 in Mexico and 6 journalists in Afghanistan. The country that has been accused of imprisoning most of the journalists is China, which usually tops this list every single year. Apart from China, the countries where journalists have mostly been detained include Myanmar, Belarus, which we have discussed is the last dictatorship of Europe, and Hong Kong, where the Chinese authorities have imprisoned a lot of journalists for speaking against the government. The report also says that the number of female journalists being detained is also at an all-time high. India has also been regarded as one of the most dangerous nations for journalists, with 4 killings in the past 1 year. Now, what exactly is the status of freedom of press in India, and where do we stand? In one of the first few cases of the Supreme Court in 1950, the Supreme Court had observed that the freedom of press is the foundation of all the democratic organizations in the country. Although the Constitution of India does not specifically mention the freedom of press, but it is considered as implied under Article 19, subsection 1A of the Constitution, which says that all citizens shall have the right of freedom of speech and expression. In order to ensure that the freedom of press is protected, in 1978, a statutory body was created called the Press Council of India. It is a regulatory body that aims to preserve the freedom of press and improve the standards of newspapers and news agencies in India. The Press Council of India consists of a chairman and 28 other members. Remember the fact that the chairman is selected by the Lok Sabha Speaker, the chairperson of Rajya Sabha, and a member from the Press Council of India elected from amongst the members. If you have any complaint against a journalist or an editor, you can go ahead and file it with the Press Council of India. Now, the same organization that came up with this report, that is Reporters Without Borders, this organization also publishes a World Press Freedom Index, as per which in 2021, India is ranked at 142nd place out of 180 nations, which is not something that we should be proud about. These are the articles that we wanted to discuss from the Hindu newspaper today. Now, a couple of practice questions. Number one, ensuring the freedom of media is an essential part of a successful democracy. Discuss the significance of this statement and the steps taken by the Government of India to ensure the same. Second, the Armed Forces Special Powers Act of 1958 has often been criticized as being a draconian act for the unbridled power it gives to the armed forces. In your opinion, should the law be repealed? Comment. Both these questions have to be answered within 250 words each. Thank you so much for watching the video.